This is Dan Rogers, your host on We the People Town Square, coming to you from the center of the universe, the high plains of Texas, near the headwaters of the Prairie Dog Town fork of the Red River. Today is January the 8th of 2024, and today we are here with John Smithee, who's running for the state representative of District 86. John, welcome.
Good to be here, Dan.
So you've decided to throw your hat and run another term. I guess we can start off with telling the voters why you want to do that.
Well, you know, it took me a while to decide to seek another term. But one of the deciding factors was my good friend Forr Price, who's represented Potter County for a number of years, had decided not to run again. That's going to be a great loss for the Panhandle. Forr's been one of the very much respected legislators in the House, maybe the most respected, really. And because he goes down there to work, and he's down there for the right reasons. And so when Forr decided to leave, we've always, for years, this goes back many, many years, where we've always, as a legislative delegation, tried to space out when we would leave office so that we weren't in a situation like Lubbock was in several years ago, where they had two freshman House members in the same term. It takes usually a session for a House member to kind of get acclimated as to how to get things done for their district. And up here it's okay, you know, if you live in Dallas or Fort Worth or Houston, where, you know, Harris County has over 30 House members. And so, you know, if they lose 4 or 5 in a year, that's no big loss for that community because they've got other legislators to take up the slack. But right now, we only have 2.5 legislators basically representing the Panhandle, Forr and I, and then Ken King, whose district has taken in a considerable amount of territory other than the Panhandle. So that's why I say 2.5. And so we really, for the benefit of the area, need to space our retirements and our decisions not to run again. We need to space those out. We would be better not to have 2 freshman representatives in the area in the same. That was my thinking. The other thing, we're in the middle of some projects for this area that I think are fairly important. And you know, you just hate to leave those projects until they get completed. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is, you know, we were very fortunate in this last session with a lot of help from the Lieutenant Governor and from Senator Sparks of getting $160 million appropriated for a state mental hospital in Amarillo. And that is something that's going to be a very big asset for our area. What we thought was the hard part was going to be getting the money, but it turns out that's the easy part. Now the hard part is going to be getting it built, because it's very difficult to get one of those facilities built and operational. It's probably going to be a 3 or 4 year project, but we've got to get, you know, they're doing site selection right now, and then we're going to have to bring in a lot of people here to work in this facility. We don't have the trained local people to work in the facility to get it fully staffed by the time it is operational. Working on that. We're working on also some wind and solar developments in the what is the 86th district. To do that, we're probably going to have to get some expansion of the CREZ line to be able to do that. But we're talking about billions, with a B, billions of dollars worth of potential investment in our area. So there are a number of other local projects in various areas of the Panhandle that we're in the middle of right now. So I'd like to get some of those to conclusion over the next couple of years.
That sounds like a lot's going on. So you're probably known recently for your speech on the House floor supporting, not necessarily supporting Paxton, but in concern over the process that was gone through. Do you want to kind of explain what went on there?
Yeah, it was really unprecedented in Texas history what happened. And just to give you a little bit of a rundown on kind of how it developed, you know, none of us really in the House, except for probably a dozen or so how the speaker and a dozen or so members knew this was coming up, but we traditionally end our session, almost every session, on Memorial Day weekend, which our last day is normally a Monday. The Monday is Memorial Day. And so that last weekend is a fairly busy weekend of getting bills passed, getting bills over the finish line. And so the Thursday before the Saturday, we started hearing rumblings just by rumor around the Capitol that there was an impeachment proceeding coming up. First question is, who's it going to be? And then we started hearing the Attorney General's name, Ken Paxton. And so by that afternoon, it was officially announced that an impeachment resolution had been filed and that we were going to vote on the resolution on Saturday. Well, that's about 48 hours notice. And, you know, in my career, I've been in the legislature a long time, never done an impeachment before. We had there was an investigation several years ago on a region at the University of Texas, Wallace Hall, but it never materialized, but never had voted on an impeachment resolution. And so first thing I did was I went to the state or the legislative law library and said, give me everything you got on impeachment. And they had quite a bit. They had a lot of the historical references from the previous 2 or 3 impeachments that we've had in Texas, the Ferguson impeachment, Paul Ferguson and a couple others. We had a land commissioner one time. And then so I got that historical perspective of how they had been done in the past. It was limited information, but it was good information, what they had available. And then I also set some time up to talk to the chairman of the committee that did the impeachment, which was Andrew Murr. Visited with him for an hour or so, just to kind of get background on what they were doing. And then I reached out to the Attorney General's office to kind of get their side of the story. And that was very helpful. So I tried to get both sides. And the more I got into it, the more really shocked I was about why we were doing this as a House. First of all, we could have done it later. We could have come back. We were in session pretty much continuously from January to the first week of December. But why it had to be done that Saturday. And the more it was rushed and the more information I got, the more skeptical I became of the whole process. And so it was kind of like at the last minute, I decided, you know, I really need to say something, because if I don't, it's going to be hard to live with myself. So I got up, basically kind of wrote my own notes for my speech, and got up and gave the main defense for no impeachment in the House on that Saturday afternoon. I thought I'd done a great job. You know, I thought, well, I've persuaded a lot of people, but when the end vote came, you know, we only got 23 no votes on the impeachment resolution. And a lot of members came up and told me, they said, you know, we think you're right. We agree with you, but, you know, we really need to, you know, there's a lot of pressure on us to vote for this. And so the House does the impeachment. And then, of course, the Senate followed up with the trial in September and basically acquitted the Attorney General at that point. But I hope the House of Representatives never does anything that way again, because that's not good for Texas. There are instances where you should impeach, probably, but you need to be very careful to make sure that it's the right instance and that what has been done justified impeachment. What we discovered in the Senate trial, of course, was that a number of the allegations that had been made had no real evidence. They were just basically assumptions that people had made. Well, this is true, so this must be true. And when these witnesses were cross-examined, most of them basically admitted there's no evidence here. And, you know, you can't really convict someone or impeach someone just based on speculation or rumor or something like that. That's just not right. And what made this so much more wrong, really so wrong, was that it was only a matter of months since the voters had overwhelmingly elected Ken Paxton to be the Attorney General. And there was nothing new here. These were all allegations that his political opponents had brought out in the campaign. He had refuted most of them. And ultimately, the voters considered these allegations, considered the evidence, and decided to elect Ken Paxton. So here we were basically trying to override the voters, which I think you better be very careful before you try to do that. There may be instances where that's called for. For instance, if somebody gets elected and then does something really bad and you've got evidence they did it. But those instances are very few and far between. I'm not aware of any that I've ever seen. So I think whenever you're talking about overriding a vote that's been conducted by the voters, you better be very careful that you're on the right side.
Yeah. I think the city of Amarillo learned that.
Yeah, you better listen to the voters, and sometimes there are other circumstances, I guess, that you have to take into consideration. But by and large, the voters in this area are very, very smart, and they're very perceptive. I think more so here than in most parts of Texas, and so you have to have faith in the voters.
Yeah, I agree with that. Why do you think so many people went along with the impeachment?
Well, I know the speaker pushed it pretty hard. They have what they call in the House speaker votes, where the speaker kind of lets it be known that he wants you to vote a certain way. A lot of members are very much influenced by that because they don't want to get crossways with the speaker. And because of committee assignments, getting bills set on the calendar and everything. And I have no desire to get crossways with the speaker. I don't think that's necessarily productive. But on the other hand, I've over the years I've done things where I thought I should have spoken up, and I didn't, and I always have a hard time kind of living with myself after that. And so I've learned over the years when you get this feeling inside that tells you something's not right here and you better speak up. Well, you better speak up because you're going to be sorry if you don't. You have a kind of a split-second decision sometimes whether to say something or not say something. And I think on balance, you err if you don't. It's an error not to speak up and say something when that happens. It may not do any good, but at least you know that you did the right thing in that circumstance.
So do you think that the House has a management problem?
Yeah, I think it's you got 150 members. First of all, it's a very unwieldy group to begin with. Very, very diverse in terms of political viewpoints. There's a Republican majority, by about a little over 10 votes. So you've got a majority, but it's not a major majority. It's certainly not a 2/3. So the speaker, this speaker, Dade Phelan, like the previous two speakers, got elected by virtue of putting together a coalition of both Republicans and Democrats. And it's very hard to keep that entire coalition happy. You've got to do enough to keep the Republicans happy, but then you've got to not do enough to keep the Democrats happy. And that's why, in most of these sessions, you see kind of mixed results. You see some good bills passing, but you see a lot of good bills that, from a conservative standpoint, there's no reason for them not to pass, but for some reason they don't pass. And usually it's because time ran out, because you can say, well, we wanted to do it, but the clock ran out. But there's not a time problem. We meet for 140 days. We spend a good part of those 140 days not doing a lot of substantive work. That's the way it's always been, and that's really what the Constitution intends. It won't let us pass a bill for the first 60 days. But we've got plenty of time to do what we need to do if we manage properly. So from a management perspective, yes, the time management was a problem in the regular session. And I'm of the thought that if we had handled these issues, which were all there were no issues in the specials, no new issues in the special session. There were issues that had been there in the regular session. Had we dealt with those issues and dealt with them either successfully or decisively, and when I say decisively, I mean where you decisively say, no, we're not going to do that, and we got everybody on record saying, no, we're not going to do it, we probably wouldn't have been back in special session, because virtually everything that we dealt with in special session, the Senate had passed in regular session, but the House didn't pass. So I would prefer to go ahead and take up those issues in the regular session, get the vote out there. If they don't pass, they don't pass, but at least everybody's on record, and you can see who supported this, who didn't support this, and kind of know where people are on it.
Yeah, so really it is a management problem. They should have ran that stuff through, had a vote, and got it over with.
Yeah, because the votes were there for everything that we did. Okay, we didn't do a lot on border security during the regular session. We did some, but we finally in the special session got the money for the wall, additional miles of wall that the state's going to build. We also got the bill passed that makes it a state crime to enter the country illegally, which I think will be of some benefit. The Biden administration's already trying to set it aside. But we could have passed the tax relief because the votes were there to do that. The only thing that we probably couldn't have done was the voucher or ESA bill because the votes were never there in the House to pass it. And that was verified, finally in the fourth special session when we finally really had a vote on the issue. So you probably couldn't have gotten that done in the regular session, but at least you would have had the vote, and that's really all you got anyway. In November, the end of November, was a vote, and so you know where you are on it.
So ultimately, it failed again, right?
Yeah, well, what happened was we had the Senate had passed two bills, Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 2, which Senate Bill 1 was education savings accounts, and Senate Bill 2 was additional financing for our public schools. Teacher salary increases. I mean, it was a big salary increase for our local teachers here. The Senate passed those separately. The Speaker didn't want to do those separately. He wanted to tie those two together, which I disagreed with. So we did a House Bill 1. We didn't take up the Senate bills, which we could have done, but we came up with a whole new bill, House Bill 1, that tied the two issues together. And, the governor had indicated that unless the ESA bill passed, unless that piece passed, he was not going to permit the additional funding to go through. So that was tied together in the House. The only vote that we really took in the House was a vote on whether to take that ESA language out of the funding bill, and it passed. It was the Rainey Amendment. It passed, and as a result of that, the vouchers or ESAs came out of the bill, and the author of the bill just pulled the bill down, which you can do. And so that effectively ended any attempt to get additional funding for public schools or education savings account. It officially, I think it, as a practical matter, died that day.
So everything pretty much stayed the same.
Yeah.
Well, it's my understanding that roughly 70% of the voters want school choice.
Well, I voted against the Rainey Amendment because, in the last Republican primary, in the 86th district that I represent, it was well over 80% of Republican voters. I understand not everybody's a Republican primary voter, but it was well over 80%. And so you get back to this that favored, school choice. And so you get back to this deal about listening to the voters. At some point you've got to actually listen to the voters, and that was one of the reasons that I opposed the Rainey Amendment. I also wanted to get that money out that we had basically appropriated for teacher salary increases under the Senate bill. Our rural teachers, a lot of my teachers are rural school district teachers under that criteria. They would have gotten a $10,000 a year pay increase. Amarillo teachers within Amarillo would have gotten a little bit over $4,000 per year because it's not really what they consider a rural district. But that money was there. It was set aside. It was appropriated, but it was never pushed out to the school districts. And so it's still sitting there, but it's not going to benefit the schools or the teachers, probably until the next regular session.
You think we'll have a new speaker?
It's too early to know. The speaker has a very tough local race in his own district, and then assuming he wins that, he has two constituencies. One is his local constituency as a state representative, and then once he gets elected to that, if he wins that election, then he has a constituency of the House members, and so a lot of that will be determined by who the House members are next session, because there are a number of contested races around. I would think that I think there are a lot of House members that are somewhat disenchanted with the way this last session went. I know I felt like we really wasted a lot of time. We didn't need to be down there the whole year. We could have gotten our business done a lot quicker. I would also, on some of these bills that that have overwhelming Republican support, pretty much unanimous Republican support, we've got the majority. Why can't we get those bills passed? And so I think there's going to be a lot of dissent based on that. And so ultimately, the way a speaker's race works in the House is a funny thing. It's hard to explain because it's hard to understand. It's almost like a popularity contest, but it's a complicated process. But one of the things we did several years ago was, this was about 7 or 8 years ago, where we went to a system to try to stop the Democrats basically from choosing the next speaker, even though they were the minority party. So we said, okay, we're going to elect the Republican speaker candidate in the Republican caucus. And everybody thought, that's a great idea. Well, the first time that we elected a new speaker after Speaker Strauss left, what happened was that Dennis Bonnen, who was running for speaker, went out and got around 50 Democrats, somewhere in the 30 to 50 range of Democrats as supporters, and then came to Republicans and said, look, I've already got these numbers. And so he was able to put together a coalition where he had enough votes to be able to be elected speaker, even though he probably at that time didn't have a majority of the Republicans on his side. The problem is once you show that you've got over 76 votes, everybody just starts piling in because nobody wants to be on the losing side of the speaker's race. And so as a result of that, when we had our caucus vote, it was, I think, a unanimous vote for Dennis Bonnen. And so what we realized is this whole concept we had put together, what didn't work that time. And we were trying to figure out, is there any way to make it work in the future? And we've never changed it. We've never had the votes to change it. What I would like to do is push our caucus selection process up to the day after the November election, before anybody has a time to go out and get the Democrats' support, and for the caucus to go ahead and take a position then. I'm pretty well committed to voting for whoever the caucus decides that it should vote for. Because but once again, if the caucus vote is predetermined by what the Democrats do, then we lose it all. So that's kind of where we are. A lot of it will depend. A lot of what happens next time depends on the process. I think there's a lot of people that would probably like to do something different.
Well, and it's not a given that Phelan will win his House seat back.
No, I mean, of course, that's about as far away from Amarillo as you can get in Texas, because that's down in the Beaumont area. Mm-hmm. So I don't have much inside information on it, but everything you hear is that he has a very difficult race down there, and particularly in a Republican primary. So
that's what elections are about.
Yeah.
When people do something the voters don't want, they can get rid of them.
Yeah, and he's taken a lot of criticism. Of course, the lieutenant governor's been very critical of the way he handled the House, and even the governor here recently has been critical of the way the House operated in those last 2 or 3 months. I know it's very frustrating. It's got to be frustrating for the lieutenant governor when, as he says, he gets these conservative bills out of the Senate almost immediately, and then sends them to the House, and they sit there for 3 months. Nothing ever happens.
Yeah, it looks like the Senate runs like a well-oiled machine compared to the House.
It's an easier machine to run because it's 31 as opposed to 150. You have to understand that. But
sure.
But on the other hand, there's the majority is supposed to run the House. Okay, I mean, it's not supposed to be the minority running the House. We respect the minority. We don't want to make the minority absolutely powerless, because I've been in the minority before. I spent a good number of years as a Republican when the Democrats controlled the Texas House. And so I understand what it's like to be on the other side of this. And I'm even if I'm in the minority, I'm entitled to represent my voters and to have that avenue available to make their voices heard. So we never really want to shut out the minority. We don't want to disrespect the minority, but we also have to understand that that the principle of our republic is that the majority basically rules, and there are limitations to what the majority can do, constitutional limitations. But other than that, the majority is really who ought to be making the decisions as to the policy for the state.
Yeah, but you protect the rights of the minority, and that's the difference between a republic and a democracy.
Yeah, constitutionally, there are things we can't do. And, the legislature is actually very limited in power under the Texas Constitution. The framers, of the Texas Constitution were very jealous of the power they were going to give the governor, the legislature, and the courts. And so as a result, there are so many things that most legislators can do that we can't. For example, we can't pass a state income tax, personal income tax. Constitution says we can't. We can put it on the ballot, but we can't do it. We can't incur debt. We can't vote ourselves a salary increase. We can't pass casino gambling because the Constitution says we can't do all that unless the voters approve of it. And so we're limited in a lot of areas. A lot of things I might want to do that the Constitution won't allow us to do without a constitutional amendment.
Well, that's good. I think it's Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution points out that it's the individuals, the voters, they have the authority in Texas, not anybody else.
And I love
the individual.
I love the Texas Constitution, but I hear people all the time say, well, it's antiquated. We need to mend it, bring it up to norm. But you have to understand the historical perspective. Texas had just come through Reconstruction, where Texans had virtually no control over their own government. It was all run out of Washington. And so the primary mover in the constitutional debate was the Grange Party, which was it was an agricultural party, but it was kind of like an agricultural organization, I should say, kind of like a farm bureau or something like that. But it was basically the Tea Party of that century, and they were for citizens' rights, and they were tired of government that was not responsive to the people, and so they didn't really trust a governor. They didn't trust the legislature. They really didn't trust anybody that had anything to do with government. And so one of the really brilliant things that the Constitution does is that it limits government. It's a very limiting document. And, people complain because, we have, I don't remember how many ballot propositions we had this time a couple of months ago, but it was a lot. And some of them are very complicated, very detailed. Seems like every time we have a number of deals, and people say, well, why do we have to have all these? Well, the reason is because of the limits that the Constitution puts on the legislature to pass these things.
I think it's a good thing myself.
I do too.
But I think the way the Texas Constitution is structured, one person can take their grievance to the legislature, and it has to be heard.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, we had an exception of somewhat during the COVID session, which was 21, because everything kind of changed then. But we really didn't alter this, and that is the deal now. Any bill that comes up before the legislature, we have a policy where any Texan can come to Austin and testify for or against that bill. Many states don't have that, and certainly the federal government doesn't. If you want to go to Washington and testify about a bill, you're probably not going to be able to. Right. But in Texas, of course, there's a distance limitation because we're 500 miles away from Austin. But we have a lot of people from the Panhandle that come down and testify about the bills that we have in front of us. And I hope we never lose that here in Texas. Now, when you're sitting on a committee and it's 6 a.m. and you've been there since noon the day before, so you kind of, it's at some point you think maybe we could put a limit on this somehow, but that's just that's really a good thing that all these people can come testify and have their say, and it does make a difference. I think a lot of legislators really pay attention to what voters, particularly from their area, say on these issues.
Well, that's the way our process should work, I
Yeah.
think. I mean, that's a republic.
Yeah, and that's something, fortunately, that's been preserved, ever from the time Texas passed a million people to now, where it's over 30 million. That's something we've been able to preserve, is that ability for public input. Not everybody wants to come to Austin and testify about every bill, but there are some bills that people will want to testify for, and we want them to have that opportunity.
I guess another big issue that y'all talked about was property taxes.
Yes.
What got accomplished there, and what do you think still needs to be done?
Well, we were in a very fortunate position this session because we had probably by far the largest surplus we had ever had in the state. Part of that was inflation, honestly. Part of it was those federal COVID dollars that came in that was really kind of just funny money. But it was also the post-COVID economy when people had gone a year without buying anything, and then they went out and started buying refrigerators and sofas and things like that. When people are buying furniture and appliances, we get a lot of revenue. That's where our revenue basically comes from.
Sales tax.
Sales. We're a sales tax-based revenue. So we had this surplus, this very, very large surplus. We were able to do a lot of good things, and one of it was try to give back to the taxpayers. And really the most effective way to do that is through property tax relief. So we bought down, so the House and the Senate got into a debate. Primarily it was the leadership in the House and the Senate. The our Lieutenant Governor Patrick wanted to increase the homestead exemption significantly to give relief to homeowners, and particularly to senior homeowners whose taxes are basically frozen but still pay a high rate of tax. And so the Lieutenant Governor wanted to accomplish this tax buy down by raising the homestead exemption and give most of the relief to homeowners. The Speaker, on the other hand, wanted to do a rate compression on all taxes where it would be an equal, or a roughly equal tax break on both commercial properties and residential properties and homesteads. And, to me, the obvious answer to that disagreement all along was, well, you do both. You raise the homestead exemption, which helps the homestead owner, and you do a tax compression that spreads that tax break across the board to where, the homestead exemption doesn't help renters, for example. And we've got a lot of people who rent here in Texas. So theoretically, if you reduce you compress the tax rate on apartments or rental housing, hopefully that reflects in the rental rates. That's where I think it was obvious we needed to go there, but we didn't get matching bills passed in the regular session. No agreement was ever reached, and it took us until the second special session to actually get a deal worked out that basically did what we should have done to begin with, and that was combine both of those. So we did the $100,000. We went up to $100,000 on the homestead exemption, which I think without exception, in our area, and all over Texas really, reduced what homeowners pay for their homestead ad valorem taxes. I know most people I talk to, their taxes went down, somewhere $500,000 to $1,500, which was certainly a welcome break for them. Kind of got them back to where they were 3 or 4 years ago. So I think we saw some very real results there. The compression also helped a little bit. But the problem is you don't want all that to get eaten up the next year by appraisal increases, and there's so many ways that property tax goes up. So that's always a concern. So I think we did what we could with what we had available, but I don't know, how. I think we're always looking for ways to try, because property tax is really a strangler as far as the family budgets and as far as the economy is concerned.
If I have a $500,000 sitting in a New York bank or Texas bank, I'm not charged property tax.
No, you're not. Just if you have real property.
But if I invested in Texas, they come after 2.5 to 3%
Yep.
every year. So it disincentivizes people to invest in Texas. Why do we have it?
Well, the reason is, the state doesn't collect any property tax.
Right, that's all local.
Yeah, but it's how we fund, mostly fund, first of all, our municipalities, the cities. It's how we fund our counties, and it's how we fund our school districts, which is the largest share, and it's how we fund our hospital districts, and it's how we fund our junior college districts like Amarillo College. So that's the system that you have in place, and so Ann Richards used to say when she was governor, if it's true, she said, there's only three things we can tax. We can tax what you own, what you produce, or what you spend, and those are really the only three areas that our taxes can hit. And
Well, I just think from a practical matter, it's not a fair tax in the sense that you have bureaucrats assessing values. Every value is wrong. It's either overassessed or underassessed.
it's a subjective value.
It's subjective, applied by a bureaucrat, and they change every day.
And
There's
I
all
look
kinds
at
of factors that affect
and I look
value.
at valuations of my neighbors, and there's not a tremendous amount of consistency there. I would agree.
So my point is, why wouldn't we go to a system that's fair?
Well, and I think we're constantly looking for a system like that. You pointed out $1 million or $500,000 in a bank account that maybe in Amarillo or maybe it's in New York or somewhere. But the same thing could be said for a mutual fund, for example. You can invest in securities, and there's no property tax on those. So
Don't give them any ideas.
well, but constitutionally, we just passed a prohibition on a net worth type tax.
Mm-hmm.
So
But a property tax to me is almost
a net worth tax. Yeah,
That's real close.
Of course, it's authorized by the Constitution. The property taxes are specifically. So
Well, I think you could go with it. Why don't we just go with a sales tax on real estate transactions, like anything else you buy? If you buy a truck or a vehicle or whatever, buy a house, you pay the sales tax, and you're done.
well,
And then then you have the true value, and then you're treating everybody the same under the tax system with compressions and giving homeowners a break, mainly because they vote, right?
right.
That's why they're doing. It just would be fair if you went with a consumption tax, and then they own their property in Texas, and then people would have an incentive to invest in Texas.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. If you're going to fund, like I say, the state doesn't raise any ad valorem tax. So we've got to give
The state regulates,
the state does regulate.
and you have a huge bureaucracy and interest involved in property taxes
Yes.
and special interests.
So what we've got to do, if we end property tax or significantly curtail it, is we've got, in all fairness, we have to give local governments a way to raise revenue so that they can hire police, hire fire protection.
Well, you could do that with a sales tax. The state collects it, and it refunds just like they do the rest of the sales tax back to the local entities, and it would streamline everything and make it accurate.
Well, we actually do that to some extent now with the local sales tax, that increment of the sales tax.
The system's set up to do it.
Yeah. So there's two things we've looked at over the years, and there are two possible solutions. One is raising the rate, the sales tax rate. The other is expanding the base of what we call, what the sales tax covers. There are a lot of things that are exempted in Texas that in most states are not exempted.
Right.
For example, in Texas, food items, that's one of the biggest ones. People go to the grocery store, on most items that they buy as far as groceries, they don't pay sales tax. Some items are taxable. You could raise a significant amount of money if you put a sales tax on groceries. Now, you're not going to get all the way to where you can eliminate property tax, but you raise a significant amount of money. One thing we don't tax in Texas that some states do are services. For example, you go to a doctor, a lawyer, a CPA, you get your bill, there's a tax on the service. There are some services we tax, but most services we don't tax.
And there's no tax on labor.
No tax on labor. And also, as you mentioned, property transactions, where if you sell a piece of property, whether it's your home or whatever, there's a sales tax of some percentage levied on that. I've seen all of those proposals discussed over the years, and there's always a catch to something. I mean, there's always a reason to do or not to do something a particular way, which doesn't mean you can't do it or shouldn't do it. It just means it's an issue that has to be debated at that point.
Why couldn't you say, okay, let's try it in 3 counties and see how it works?
So you could basically segregate maybe 3 counties and charge the tax in those counties and rebate that basically to the local governments to fund the local government. You might be able to do that. Of course, the comptroller has a remarkable wealth of data available from where I can call the comptroller's office and say, okay, well, let's raise a half cent a tax in Randall County or Oldham County. We raise the sales tax. How much money would that produce? Well, within a matter of a couple of hours, they can get back to me with a dollar amount. So we have good data.
Yeah, but they're looking at data. They don't understand human psychology.
Well, there's a human psychology. And for instance, if you were to raise the sales tax rate in Texas from where it is now in the 8% range, if you were to raise it up to the 10% range or 12%, every incremental raise you put on there forces some people on particularly larger ticket items to go out of state. You know, about 70% of Texas residents live within 120 to 150 miles from another state. Houston, for example, Dallas, Amarillo was a good example. Where if you were going to buy a large ticket, a motor vehicle, a refrigerator, something of that nature, it might pay to go out of state to buy it and bring it in. So you have that interstate issue where you're costing your local merchants business, and you're also costing your sales tax base of your local government. So you don't want to raise your sales tax so high that you're forcing people into, and of course there's the online economy too, that a large part of that still doesn't pay sales tax. A large part does, but a large part escapes sales tax on that. So everything you do, you have to look at the pros and cons of what that might produce.
I just believe if you did that, it would save people so much money that the psychological effect would be so great that people wouldn't do that. I mean, you're going to have a few people maybe, but I think there's ways and things that you could put in place to minimize that.
Yeah.
And I could come up with some ideas probably on how to stop that.
So I think all these ideas need to continue to be debated. And here's my worst concern about property tax right now is that 2 things really. One is that it's getting more and more expensive to own a home in Texas. And for a lot of young families just starting out, I think some of the data shows us that we have more young families renting now than we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The home ownership as a percentage has started to go down a little, and that's a scary trend. And what that tells you is that the expense of owning a home has gone up, and it's become prohibitive, even for many families where both spouses work. And so as a result of that, we don't ever want to get to where a family has no hope of buying a home, because a home is a great investment for most families because, first of all, it gives them an anchor. It gives them, but it also gives them an investment that they can build on. They can get that home substantially paid for, and then go buy a bigger home or a nicer home, and it's a savings mechanism for them as well as the pride of home ownership, and also the anchor aspect of having a home for a family. I think it's good. It's a very positive thing as far as keeping the family together, is to have that home.
Yeah, and that's why I just think we shouldn't. That's why I'm so against property taxes, because people never feel like they own it. You know,
Well, you really don't if you think
because
about
you're just
it.
renting it from the government.
Most people, if you don't pay, not every situation, we have some exceptions, but most instances, if you don't pay your property tax after a certain period of time, you lose your property.
That's right. And I just think that in Texas, we should own our property. And I think the voters would be for getting rid of property taxes and coming up with a better way to bring in that revenue. And maybe we don't always need to spend more money. And I think part of the problem with the property tax system is we keep building new and fancy and fancier, and it's just there's almost no limit because there's no bridle on the appraisal districts, and everybody's pushing to my value went up and the values are going up, and so the taxes go up and they bring in more money and they build fancier and more elaborate schools, and I think the voters, but they're struggling. The actual average citizen out there, they struggle to pay their house payment, their car payment, their rent, but yet government seems to be doing pretty good.
Yep. And I mean, like everybody else, pretty much everybody just got through paying their property taxes for this year, or will be paying them in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and it makes a pretty good dent in your bank account when you pay those property taxes. It's a significant thing. So I mean, my position, I would like to change it, and I'm open to suggestions or ideas as to how to change it. And I think that's a debate that we need to be constantly having. Is what are the other options out there? What could we do to either eliminate the property tax maybe, or else to substantially reduce property tax and put some control on where property tax can go? And I think it's going to be very difficult to get to that point. But, you know, a lot of people, politicians campaign on this deal. Well, I want to end property taxes. Well, I don't want to hear that. What I want to hear is how you're going to end property taxes. Yeah, solutions to it. I mean, I want to end all taxes. That would be wonderful if we didn't have to pay any taxes at all. We could just keep all of our money. But I know that's not realistic. I want a police department, and I want a fire department, and I want teachers in the schools, and I want them to be paid competent, adequately to have good teachers for our children.
But we don't need all this extra administration that we never had when we were kids.
There seems to be a lot of administration, and how much, I'm not an expert on any of that, but there seems to be an awful lot of administration these days in the schools.
So I think the only way I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes the only way to cure a disease is to starve it of the oxygen. And money's the oxygen. So we keep giving them what they want. And sometimes you just have to say no.
Yeah.
And one way to do it is to eliminate property taxes, go to a different taxing system and say, this is what it produces, you live within it. And they will.
Yeah.
But they're not going to do it until you make them.
Although I will say this on the other side of that. I remember one time we had an agency that had spent I can't remember which agency it was, a state agency that had spent an unusual amount on retreats and conferences for their employees. So we cut their budget because we said, you can't do that. Well, we cut their budget thinking that would eliminate that, but they kept doing the retreats and conferences. And what they did was cut back on client services to the taxpayers. We were able to get that corrected, but you have to be careful because, typically you cut budgets, the waste keeps going and the services get reduced. So you've got to do that delicately. But I agree. My examination of a lot of agencies over the years, actually including our own office, I try to evaluate our own legislative office for efficiency, and you have some what I would call wasted resource that's unavoidable. Because you want somebody there to answer the phone, but they're not on the phone every minute. And so they need to be available. And so to that extent, you might say, well, when they're not on the phone or answering the phone, it's a wasted time. But that's probably part of that's unavoidable.
They could be calling constituents and just checking up on them and see how they're doing.
Well, they do. We try to keep them busy. We have plenty of work to do. We have probably the smallest staff in the Capitol actually working. But but we try to examine that to see how efficiently are we doing our job, are we doing our job adequately, or are we efficient with the resources that we have? And so, you continually try to do that. And but, we also have the problem with some agencies that in Texas over the years that are just spending blocks of money on something that's really not even necessary or even beneficial to the constituency. Just they have a program just to have it. And so those are areas where you can really cut out a lot of waste. They just somehow they end up with more money than what they really need to do their work, or else they've diverted money from essential services to these unnecessary programs. So it's a constant struggle. I mean, you never get it fixed. I think you just have to realize you never get the problem fixed. You just have to keep working on it and trying to make things work better.
Try to minimize it.
Yeah.
Well, very good. Well, it sounds like you're doing a fantastic job down there. And but this year, you have drawn an opponent.
Yes, sir.
So why do you think they should choose you instead of your opponent?
Well, that's a decision all the voters have to make. But, I think it's fair to ask, why any candidate say, well, why are you the one that voters ought to vote for? And I think there's a balance here between experience and being there. Experience is a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing. But I do have experience. I know most of the people involved, in state government. I know the agencies by and large. And, of course, they change so often that sometimes the people I thought I knew aren't there anymore. But knowing who to call, most of what we do, people think we vote on things, and we do vote on things during session, but most of what we do is try to work out constituents' issues. We have a lot of issues with, for instance, TxDOT. On transportation issues, we have, dealing with them right now, some closed crossings and so forth. We deal with, with issues with child protective services, adult protective services. And so a good part of what we do is directed toward helping our citizens deal with state government, whatever aspect it may be driver's license, it may be. I mean, there are 100 different areas where we try to help and so we try hard to, and one of the things that I hate about government is so many times you call government and you don't get an answer, or you get an answer that's not really, it's like, we don't care about your problem. And so what I tell all the people that we have working is, when somebody has a problem, and I don't really need to tell them this because the people that work for me, two people basically that work for me are good. They understand this, that they work for the taxpayers. And so when the taxpayer has a problem, we've got a problem. And we're going to try to deal like it's just as much our problem as it is their problem. And we're going to try to be responsive to that.
So you're more or less the ombudsman between the voter, the citizen, and government.
Yeah, I'm fortunate in a way. I serve at the lowest rung of elected state government, if is a good way to look at it. There's a lot of state offices, but the Texas House is the lowest state elected office. So when you serve at the local level, you represent probably the fewest number of people, although I represent almost 200,000 now. Mm-hmm. And so I see my constituents in the grocery store. I mean, I learn more in the grocery store. I go to the grocery store a lot. So I learn more in the grocery store than I can learn from a poll, for example. I know what people are thinking because they tell me. Yeah. So when you're serving at this lowest level of state government, the good news is that you're able to get input from voters. The bad news, I guess, is that if they've got a complaint, generally they bring it to me because we're the closest to them. And so the complaints are, once again, good and bad. I mean, first of all, nobody wants to get a complaint about state government. I'd rather not have any complaints at all. I wish everybody was perfectly happy. But if there is a complaint, we need to know it. I mean, it's good information for us. If somebody tried to get a driver's license and couldn't get an appointment, I need to know, and I need to be able to call and find out why, and whether we can get it corrected and how quickly we can get it corrected. If some agency has snatched a child from their parents, and it wasn't called for at the time, I need to know that because that's something that we need to investigate, and if necessary, get resolved for those parents, and just as importantly, make sure it doesn't happen to somebody else. On the other hand, if we have a child in a home who's being abused and nothing happens, we need to know about that too. So it is I look at it as an ombudsman, if I could even say it, role of trying to help our constituents connect to state government. And many times they'll call an agency and get their problem worked out. They don't have to call us. But when it doesn't work the first time and they're a little bit exasperated about what they're going to do, a lot of times we're supposed to be the last line of defense. And so if we're not doing our job, I want to know, whether it's our office or whether it's a state agency, I want to know and I need to know, but we're going to try to get it fixed.
In all the years you've been down at the legislature, what do you think's changed?
Or what has changed? Well, I would say this, first of all, when I got there, the Democrats controlled everything. I had a Democrat governor, Democrat lieutenant governor, all the state officials were Democrats except for one Republican judge. And the House and the Senate were both Democrat. They were all dominated by Democrats. The session that I went in, the Republicans first crossed the 50 mark, which was a third of the House, which was a big benchmark to cross. And so that's changed. But in a way, the philosophy of the legislature in the House hasn't changed all that much. When I came in, even those were Democrats, were predominantly rural Democrats.
Yeah, they were conservative.
Very conservative. And so I never felt like I was on the losing side of most votes. I think I was on the winning side because the Republicans were voting with the rural Democrats. And, that was when I got in, there were a lot of rural Democrats in there. Now there's zero. The last rural Democrat that we had from Uvalde is not running again. So we're totally done with rural Democrats. And so you've had that partisan shift. But, I think the other big change is it's so much more contentious now than it ever was, and we used to, try to get along. We used to, I think, did a lot better job of it. And there was a time when, the main concern of people on that floor was to do the right thing, of most of them, not always all of them. But I think now, it's the votes are kind of predetermined by scorecards and so forth. And another issue that has changed things a lot is social media. For example, I see members of the legislature getting up and making a speech, getting somebody to record it, and then it's showing up on social media. And they spend the rest of the day looking at the comments to see what everybody's saying about them. That probably has been good in some ways because it gets more information out to people, but in other ways, I think it's kind of can change the complexion of the legislature. One of the good things is the information that is available to the taxpayers now. For instance, when I first got to the legislature, if you wanted to see a copy of a bill, you had to call me. We had to order a copy of it made on a copy machine, put it in the mail, and you might get it within 10 days by the time all that happened. Now you've got access to the same copy of the bill that I've got access to on the internet. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing, And also email, I think, has been a good thing, and some of the other rapid communication devices where there were times when I got letters and we'd already voted on the bill. People say, I'm against this bill, I'm for this bill, but we'd already taken the vote. So now I can get that information, that input instantaneously. Mm-hmm. And so I would have to say social media has been good in a way and it's been bad in a way. Most of the other changes that we deal with have been the same way, where, you can debate whether it's been helpful or harmful in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a course on how to use that. What is it? Something Ledge?
There's the Texas Legislature Online,
yeah,
which
that's it.
There's a wealth of information, and a lot of it's real-time information where you can see almost in real time how we vote on issues. Certainly the proceedings of not only the House but the committees in the House. Virtually every one of those is webcast, so you can watch live as it develops.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to see it, we have a course on how to use that on our We the People Town Square platform. got other courses on there too that people can. We're just trying to educate people how to take it, how to learn about how government works.
Yeah, none of that was available, 30
Yeah.
years ago. And so I think that's a big plus.
Okay. Well, do you have a website people can get a hold of you and learn more about you for those young new voters that don't know who you are?
Yeah, it's Vote John Smithee, JohnSmithee, votejohnsmithee.com.
Well, very good. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the voters before we wrap it up?
Well, I can't really. I appreciate you doing this and appreciate you doing it with everybody because I think, the information that you're able to get out there is very helpful. And so I know it takes a lot of time on your part and appreciate you going to that effort.
Well, to me, I believe, I'm like you, I trust the voters. I don't think anybody needs to tell any voter how to vote. They're quite capable of making up their mind. If we inform them and get them the information, they'll make a good decision.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I trust the voter too. All right. Well, we want to thank you for all your years of service in the House and good luck out there on the campaign trail. And thanks for throwing your hat in the ring again and giving us the option to have some wisdom and stability down in the House.
Thank
in
you.
our area.
And thanks for what you do. You have what I would judge probably the most thankless job in politics as a county chair, but I think I'm glad somebody's willing to do that.
Well, I try to make it fun and do some different things and try some different things because I want everybody to, if we can explain to people how the process works and how the two-party process works, how important it is to get them to vote in the primary where they're choosing their nominees. They have so much power as an individual to direct the direction of the state and the nation by just showing up to the precinct conventions or county conventions or state convention and being a delegate. If they just know how to do that, then we can change and bring our country back.
Absolutely. Citizen involvement is the key to everything. And if
People tell me people are waking up. I'm like, well, that's fine, but they better get up.
Yeah,
and then they got to show up.
You got to wake up, get up, and get out and
Yeah.
do something about it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, John, for coming by, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks, Dean.